I don't need another version of me. I already got me. What I need is somebody who's not me to do the kind of stuff that I don't want to do and that I don't have the skills to do.
There's so many different statistics out there about what percentage is based on nutrition versus exercise versus other factors.
Make sure that the people that are working for you understand what the outcome is that you're looking for. People need to have the sense that they can trust you. Because that's when they'll follow you. That's when they'll take your advice. I've never seen leadership as being in command. Right? There's a difference between being in command and being a leader. Leaders are not in command. If you look at some of the most powerful leaders, they're not commanders.
Hi, welcome to this signature leadership show where we help world-class leaders discover their authentic selves, and in the process, we discover ours. Our guest today is Dr. Arya M. Sharma, who is a Berlin doctor turned indie rock blues musician. And we're going to be talking today about his career as one of the world's leading experts in obesity and his new path as he nears retirement as a musician. Dr. Sharma, welcome to the show.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
And can you talk about those skill sets that you find are transferable?
Well, the first one is being very reasonable and very conscious and very aware of the things you can do and the things you cannot do. I mean, you have to know your own skill set. Like, what are your own strengths? And realizing what are the things that you're good at and what are the things that you're not good at. You know, it almost becomes philosophical. So now do you spend your time trying to get better at the things that you're not good at? Or do I invest in trying to get even better at the things that I'm already good at? And it turns out that, you know, when I look at, you know, the things that were successful, it was usually because I got better at doing things that I was already good at and finding people to do the stuff that I was not good at. You know, one of the things that I was just talking to a colleague about this yesterday was one of the most important pieces of advice that I ever got when I was starting out to build my own group. So I got my first funding to actually hire people. And the first advice that somebody gave me said, you know, I should hire people I don't like.
Really?
I said, well, why would you hire somebody you don't like? So if you do a job interview with somebody and that person just irritates you, like this is not somebody you would ever want to spend time with. You don't want to go out for a beer. You know, they're just not your kind of person that you would in your personal life want to be involved with this person. And you think about, why is that? I mean, who are the people that you like? The people you like are the people who are like you. They have we share an interest, we share a taste of music. This is how we talk. This is how we, my outlook on life is the same. Well, if it's the same, we can become best buddies and become friends. But basically, you're just another version of me. I don't need another version of me. I already got me. What I need is somebody who's not me to do the kind of stuff that I don't want to do and that I don't have the skills to do. But those are different people. And because they're different people, they're not going to be my best friends. So, just to give you a very precise, so I'm a big picture guy. But to actually get stuff done, you need the little picture guy. You need almost the obsessive, compulsive, detailed, oriented person who makes lists, who likes making lists, and then they have to tick their boxes and they have a million questions and they need. I'm not that guy. And I could never do that, which is why I could never, do the nitty-gritty of project management. But I need somebody like that on my team, on my staff, to do that kind of work. And they love doing that work, and they're really good at that work. But on a personal level, I can't connect to these people because, they would drive me nuts just because of the way they are, personality-wise. But I need those people on my team. And the short form is hire people you don't like, because when you meet people who are very different, they think different, they approach life differently, they have other skills. I'm hiring them for their skill sets. I'm not hiring them to be my best friend.
So this sounds to me like Abraham Lincoln's team of rivals. When he was elected president, he right away surrounded himself with the competitor or his number one rival and others who had said negative things about him, had undermined him, and people asked him why he did that. And it's some of the same reasoning you're sharing here. Is that correct?
It's very similar. I often think it's task oriented. People don't hire you for things that you're interested in. People basically hire you because they want you to do something, right? So it's task oriented. You get paid to do something, and that's why you get hired. You get hired to do something. So you have to look at what is it that they want you to do, and what are the skills and the personality and the training and the knowledge and the experience that you have to do the kind of thing that I need you to do. And it turns out that the kind of people that I need to do the stuff that I don't want to do and that I don't know how to do and I don't want to be bothered doing it because I'm not good at it. When I look at the people who are good at those things, they're very different people. These are not the people that I would ever make my very close personal friends because their whole outlook on life is different. Their life experiences are different. Their interests are different. The way they approach things are different, but they have the skill set that I need, which then complements my skill set. So I can come up with crazy ideas. I'm good at that. They don't have to be crazy. I mean, I'm very realistic about the kind of things that could be done. I know the steps that would be involved in actually getting it done, but I also know that I'm not the guy who can do this. And so I need to hire people who can do this. And the reason they can do it and I cannot is because they have a different skill set and they have a different outlook on things, which in your personal life might get very irritating. But professionally is very helpful and very useful.
On that note, professionally, you mentioned something. We met at several conferences where we were on the same stage, and I really got to see you present. You're one of the world's leaders in your field professionally over the past several decades in obesity. You just mentioned that you're a big picture thinker, and I saw that in the presentations that I watched you present in. What are some of the steps, and this stays with the transferable skills for a moment, what you said there are some steps that you go through when you are envisioning or visualizing or creating these big picture, you call them crazy ideas professionally. What would 2 or 3 of those steps be, Arya?
It's almost silly, but some of it is stating the obvious. So very often, and I know that I've had success in meetings and when I meet with other people is because sometimes I just state the obvious, but I do it in a way that it sounds like a new idea, although this is the most obvious thing, right? And then and that's when I have the response of people coming up to me, that's exactly what I was thinking, but I just didn't know how to say it or I didn't know how to state it, but it is the obvious thing. And it almost seems like you're stating the obvious, but you state the obvious in a way that other people actually see that it's obvious because, I might be stating the obvious because it's obvious to me, but it might not be that obvious to other people till you actually point them to it, and then suddenly it becomes obvious to everybody. And there's lots of instances like that of things that, that professionally, where people come up to me and say, what, I listened to you speak and I had this aha moment. And I say, well, what caused the aha moment? And then they tell me it's something very trivial. Well, you could have thought of that yourself. But for some reason they did not. And it was the way I put it or the context in which I put it or the language that I used or I speak a lot in metaphors. I use a lot of analogies. And then people have these aha moments listening to me on things where I don't fully understand what the aha is about because I feel like I've just stated the obvious. I mean, I've just said things that actually everybody should know. And the other one is the elephant in the room. There's often the elephant. So there's often, and I sit through these meetings and, they go on forever and people want to talk and people are dissecting things. And I like to then very often take the whole discussion, let's step back. And then you step back to the point where you actually see the elephant. And then it turns out it's not actually even an elephant, right? We've been talking about the elephant all the time. Actually, it's a giraffe in the room, right? But we got so absorbed in looking at the elephant that nobody realized that, it's not an elephant that we're looking at. It's a rhinoceros or it's a giraffe. And that's, again, something that I kind of intuitively do, that when I see that these discussions are going into minute details, that I tend to step back and say, what is the problem we are trying to solve here? and you step back, and very often you have to sort of backpedal and say, what is the problem we need to, so before we get into what it is that we need to do to solve the problem. First of all, let's define the problem. I mean, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? And then we can brainstorm on what the things are we could possibly do to address the problem. And then we can, do all the other stuff. But if you don't have a clear understanding of what the actual problem is that you're trying to solve, then these discussions don't go anywhere. And somehow, I don't know why, I have this, I've often had this ability just by listening to other people speak about things that I can kind of take that step. I intuitively take the step back and keep reminding myself, and then obviously, the people in the room, to say, what is the problem that we're trying to solve here? And then we step back and then we reapproach it. And very often it turns out that the problem that we were trying to solve was not the real problem. It's actually, before we even get to that problem, there's a much bigger problem that we need to solve first than we need to think about. And I'll give you a very specific example. I mean, the specific example I can talk to you about is obesity, right? So we were sitting in these conferences, and everybody would say, well, obesity is a big problem. We need to do more research. We have all these research questions that we need to be answering. People were talking about, we don't have enough funding for obesity research. We write these grants. Nobody wants to fund them because nobody thinks this is. And there was a lot of talk going on how can we write better grants and how can we maybe explain the questions we're trying to answer in our research projects in a way that the funders are probably going to get excited, etc. When, I basically had this aha moment at some point. I said, why are people not so enthusiastic about funding obesity research? It's because everybody already believes we know what obesity is about. And this aha moment actually happened to me when I was recruited to Canada. My first night in Canada, where I just arrived, my family were basically coming there, and this was the first time I watched the CBC. And this guy, what was his name? The commentator, the cynical commentator who would be on the National. What's the fellow's name?
Peter Manfred?
Rex. No, Rex.
Rex.
What's his name? Murphy. No, it's not Murphy.
Yeah, maybe Mac.
Anyway, so the issue, the interesting thing was that the night I arrived in Canada, the Canadian Institute of Health Research had just made an announcement that that they had this new grant program that was going to dedicate $15 million and make that available for obesity research. And this was pure coincidence. This was on the news. Rex Murphy. Yeah. And then this guy comes on as the commentator, and in a very and using his general, satirical way of looking at things, he says, well, that's another waste of our tax money, because, what are these guys going to study? What are they going to find? Oh, eating hamburgers makes you fat. Well, we already know that. So what's the research going to get us, right? And I realized very quickly that one of the reasons that we haven't seen the investment into obesity research and obesity is not getting the attention that it actually deserves is because everybody believes we already know the answers. And let's just blame people who have obesity for being, for doing it to themselves or whatever it is. And that this issue around weight bias and stigmatization is really what is stopping everything in obesity. For people wanting to study obesity, work in obesity, fund obesity, provide access to obesity care, and all of this, is blocked by the issue around weight bias and discrimination. It's because we believe that we know what is causing obesity, when in reality we don't. But most people would be surprised at that. Well, what do you mean we don't? Of course we know it's fast food and screen time and whatever it is. It's processed foods. People think they have the answers, and then you look at the science, and then you say, well, that science doesn't actually prove the answers. A lot of the stuff is correlational, which means it's like I've said, overeating may not be the cause of obesity. It might be a symptom of obesity. People who have obesity eat more. Why? Because they have obesity, and it's not the other way around. Because it could go either way, and there's a rational, and we could talk about that. But so I realized that one of the first things, if you want to get serious about the whole obesity issue, and if you want to have more funding for obesity, and if you want people to take this topic seriously, we have to address the issue around bias and discrimination. Now, I'm a clinical guy. I know nothing about, the social sciences of bias and discrimination and all of that stuff. But then I read up on it, and I saw that there were people doing good work, but they were doing this work sort of out of a clinical context. I mean, they were like theoretical social scientists doing this stuff. Good work. But I knew that that work was not being translated into any way, into any meaningful activity that would make funding agencies feel more positive about giving us money to actually do the research. And the minute I realized, I said that, we've just spent 2 hours talking about how to improve our our grant writing. What we really should be talking about is how do we address the issue around bias and discrimination so that we can actually get people to realize that we don't know what is causing obesity. We don't know what the solutions are, but the solutions that we think should work, we clearly see are not working. And we've got to rethink this whole thing. And there's a whole bunch of science here that needs to be understood. And we're not addressing it because we think we already know the answers, when in fact we don't. And that gets back to this narrative about, we know what causes obesity, just people not moving and eating too much.
What are some of the latest advancements that you have seen where you've gotten closer to answering the question about what causes obesity?
Well, if you look at what causes, I mean, there's so many things that cause obesity in the end. Yes, obesity is caused by the fact that you're in positive energy balance, which means that ultimately you're consuming, there's more energy going into the body than going out, and that's why you store the energy, and that's where it goes, right? But the reason is why is that happening to us, right? Is it that people suddenly have lost control over their food intake, or what are the drivers? And then and you say a lot of this has to do with behaviors and culture, and how people eat is actually more interesting than what people eat. And we've spent a lot of time looking at what people eat, but we haven't actually asked the question, why are people eating what they're eating?
What do you mean by that? Can you expand on that? The how? I haven't heard that before. How people...
Oh, the how versus the what. See, I can spend a lot of time describing in very great detail what someone is eating. So I can look at somebody, somebody comes to you and say, what, Dr. Sharma, I've been gaining weight. And, I say, okay, that's great. So let's look at what's happening. Let's look at what you're eating. So, I want you to come back next time and in a basket, bring me all the groceries that you purchased to use in your house. And let's look at those, and then we'll see how much of what you're eating. And I can spend hours doing that. And I guess I'll find something that, there's chocolate and there's, other things that you're eating. But the question, so now I know what you're eating. The question I haven't answered is, why is it that why is there so much chocolate in your basket? Right? Or why is it that you eat at McDonald's 6 times a week, and not maybe once a week? So we haven't really looked at the whys very much. And then once you start delving into the whys, you see that things really become complicated. So one of the things I realized very quickly was that, we talk a lot about fast food as a problem. We focus on the food aspect. We don't focus on the fast part of it. So I'd say the problem with fast food is not the food, it's the fast. And why does it have to be fast? Because it's a time problem. Right? We live in a culture of grabbing bites. And one of my memes is that, when every time you feel like grabbing a bite, don't, because that's not how people should be eating. No, you need to be sitting down. And if you just look at this from a biological perspective, you say our bodies are designed to have meals over an extended time period. A meal should take about 20 minutes. And that's basically the idea that from the moment that you start eating, it takes your gut about 10-20 minutes to start, secreting the hormones that will then signal to the brain that you've eaten, which is why that sense of fullness, which is then the signal to stop eating, takes about 20 minutes, right? Between starting to eat and getting that sense of fullness that then makes you stop eating is a 20-minute time period. For some people, it might be longer, it might be 30 minutes. Well, you can do a lot of damage in 20 minutes, right? So it becomes a time problem. So this grabbing a bite business, where you're consuming a vast amount of calories, but you're doing it very quickly, and you're not paying attention to that, which is the other thing. So where are you eating? Well, I'm eating at my desk. I'm eating while I'm on the phone. I'm eating while I'm watching television. I'm eating while I'm having a conversation with someone, or I'm eating in my car, and I got to hurry up because I have I got 5 minutes. Let me grab some lunch. Right. So you live in that kind of culture, which is not what our bodies are designed for. Our bodies are designed for, I would say the French style eating is where you sit down, you start with an appetizer, and you relax and you pay attention to the food that's on your plate, and then you go to the next course, and then you have that course, and you enjoy the course, and you chew every bite, and and then you move on to the dessert, and then you enjoy the dessert. Now that whole meal could take half an hour, 40 minutes. Our fast food places would be out of business if it took them 45 minutes to serve you a hamburger or to feed you a hamburger. And one of the jokes I used to make is, there's a reason that hamburgers come pre-chewed, so you can bite and swallow. You think of the scenario. If you went to a fast food hamburger joint and say, okay, it's nice that you're here. Here's the menu, and then you sit down and then you look at the menu and say, okay, all right, and then they bring out the bread, they bring out the buns. And then can I start you off with some buns and some mayonnaise, and then you have the bun and the mayonnaise, and then they say, okay, are you ready for your greens? And they bring out your lettuce and your tomato, and then once you're done with that, are you ready for the main course? And then they bring out the patty, and this whole thing takes 45 minutes, and you're sitting there. They'd be out of business because I don't want to be there for 45 minutes eating. And when you start doing the math on this, and when you say people are supposed to eat 3 times a day. Each meal is supposed to take at least 20 minutes. Well, that's 60 minutes of eating. Nobody eats for 60 minutes a day, right? That does not include meal preparation, which should be from scratch, which nobody has the time to do anyway, and then cleaning up the mess afterwards, which also takes time. So simply, if that's the way people are supposed to eat, you would find it very hard to dedicate, an hour and a half every day to just eating, not while you're driving your car or checking your emails or watching television or watching the news or yelling at your kids. No, when you eat, right? So that culture of eating has changed. So we can spend a lot of time looking at what is on the plate, but what we're not spending time looking at is is there even a plate, or are you eating out of a cardboard box, or are you eating out of a wrap, right? Smoothies is a perfect example. What's the whole point behind a smoothie? It's so that I can drink it. And why would I drink it and not just eat it? It's not because the smoothie tastes better. No, I could just have the components of a smoothie on my plate, and I could just chew them. And that's the problem. I'll have to chew them. It's going to take me a lot longer to eat what's in the smoothie than to drink what's in the smoothie, and that's the whole point of the smoothie. So why would you do that? Well, that's because I don't have the time, or I don't want to spend the time, on eating the salad, because that's just going to take forever. So what I do is I'll take my salad, I put it in the blender, I make a smoothie, I drink it.
Along those lines, let's talk for a little bit about, because you've seen probably countless patients, and I'm sure amongst those people that you've seen over the years in advising them as their doctor in several capacities, as a doctor, as a researcher, and all the other components of your work. What advice, now I'm stepping back here a little bit from even where you step back, but along those lines, because people who are listening to this are business leaders, CEOs, they run organizations, and some of them I've heard will say in one way or another, directly or indirectly, they don't have time to take care of themselves. They're so focused on others. Right. When someone like that comes in and they're running a $50 million corporation, global corporation, and they're pulled in 100 different directions, including at home as well, where do you start with them to get across in the how and the what and the why as to why this matters and how they can start taking care of themselves more when it comes to nutrition, even if they're not at the point of obesity yet?
Well, the one advantage that people in that position have, of course, is that they have far bigger control over their life. So it's probably going to be much easier to get someone who's very busy, who's a CEO of a large company. They got lots of stuff going on, but that guy can go and hire a 5-star chef and a personal trainer, and they can decide that, I'm just going to tell my secretary to block the 30 minutes of my day over here because that's my lunchtime, and I'm not going to book any calls. Those guys actually have control over this. So this is a much easier problem for them to solve than someone who's not in control of their time, who's sitting, who doesn't have a personal secretary or a trainer or a personal chef who can prepare stuff for them, and who still have to get on with their lives. And so the top 1% of people who might be listening here, if you say, well, their excuse for saying they don't have time, well, they could make time if this was important enough to them, right? But which is another thing. People who are struggling with 3 jobs to feed their families and are basically working from paycheck to paycheck, those guys don't have the freedom to make those decisions. So, and that was the challenge. So I would be sitting with a lot of people, working 3 jobs, and they have kids, and they have a 2-hour commute every day to go, and they're working shifts, and they can barely make ends meet, and they're working from paycheck to paycheck. And now they're sitting in my office because they want me to give them advice on how they could go around improving their diet, and you don't, or get more physically active. I said, you don't have time for any of this. Right. The first thing we've got to figure out is where in your 24 hours of your day are you going to create the 90 minutes a day that you're going to need if you actually want to address this problem. You don't even have that time now. Right. And then we can get into the nitty gritty. So one thing I want to preface here before we get too much into the details is every patient is different. Right. And when I say that every patient is different, that means the story that leads to them having an obesity problem can be completely different from one person to the next. And so you have to take the time for each of them to understand it, because you have to address that personally, and you have to look at their own lives and say, why is it? What is your challenge? And patients sometimes, my problem is that, I come home in the evening and I'm starving. Well, the simple reason for that is because you haven't eaten all day, and if you don't eat all day, then you come home in the evening and now you're hungry. That's how bodies work. Right? Yeah, but I never have time during the day. My boss won't let me, or they're running around, or they're busy. So they have so little. So you can talk about locus of control. So a CEO of a company actually should have a lot more locus of control, because he can just hire the people. He can make time. He can just tell his staff, and those are just kind of management skills, life management skills that they would need to be pointed towards. But in reality, it's far more difficult for people who are not in those positions, who don't have control over their time, who don't have control over their income, their outcome, who can't make these choices. See, I could decide to, if I wanted to, I could say, what, Tuesday mornings, there's 1 hour, I go to play squash, or I do my tennis thing, don't book me any appointments there. If appointments come on, I'm just not available. And if you have a good, effective, front office, they'll protect you, and that's what they should be doing. Now, obviously, you have to tell them that that's what you want and that's what you need, and then you also have to kind of do what you want to do. But if you're a CEO of a large company, that you have the liberty of doing that. You have the freedom to do that. The person who's sitting at Walmart, at the checkout counter, does not have the liberty to do that. And that's why obesity management is so much more difficult. But it's not just obesity management; it's any chronic disease management, right? A lot of the things that you would say is healthy living, lifestyle, having a healthier lifestyle. A lot of that stuff is not obesity specific. I mean, if you had arthritis, I'd probably give you the exact same advice as I would give somebody who has obesity, right? In terms of lifestyle.
There's so many different statistics out there about what percentage is based on nutrition versus exercise versus other factors. Is there any statistic or data that, from a big picture standpoint, about the impact of nutrition versus exercise versus other factors that impacts a person's health?
Again, there's a lot of variability in that. So, I mean, there are these famous feeding experiments where they took a whole bunch of guys, and these were all volunteers. The Mayo Clinic did this. They would take these guys, they would put them into a metabolic ward where you can control their activity, their food intake, and then you measure how many calories somebody needs, and then you just give them 1,000 extra calories every day, and you do that for 6 or 7 weeks. And what it turns out is, although everybody's eating 1,000 extra calories, some guys are gaining weight, some guys are not. So the interesting question, well, what happens to those calories in the guys who are not gaining weight? It turns out that they actually then do something called non-exercise energy thermogenesis, which is basically fidgeting, right? These guys get restless. And some of us feel that, like when you've had a big meal or a couple of days where you've had consecutive big meals, you just feel more and more restless. I need to get out, I need to exercise, I need to get more active. Versus people who don't, that's not their response, right? They just put on the fat. From an evolutionary perspective, you would say actually that response of saying, when food is available, I'm going to eat it, and I'm just going to store those calories for times when, for times where I might need them. That is actually the normal, and you could almost say the healthy response, because that's what evolution kind of made sure that we have that property. I used to joke about this. I said, the beauty about fat tissue is that, I could eat an extra pizza today, and I can be living off this pizza, 10 years from now. because it would still be there. The calories from that pizza would still be sitting on my hips, and when I need them, I can always fall back on them. And that's the whole. But some people are not good at that. So the naturally skinny people, I mean, they're the first to go. If there was a famine, if there was a food problem, the skinny guys go first.
Can you think over your 4-decade career as a doctor? 4 decades, right? Is that about right? Can you think of, obviously without naming names anonymously, think of one particular example or instance or story that to this day really moves you, and how you were able to help someone who was obese and turn their nutrition around, or maybe that's the wrong way of saying it. Go ahead.
I mean, the first thing I should say, in my 40 years of practice, I'll be the first guy to say that I've learned more from my patients than I ever learned from medical school, right? Just listening to the stories and taking a personal interest in what actually happens to people, and how does their life look like, and what are the challenges that they're faced with, and understanding their perspective and where they're coming from and what their life looks like. Because you get people from all kinds of walks of life. You get a bus driver. Now, I'm not a bus driver. There's no bus drivers in my family. None of my close friends are bus drivers. I don't know what life for a bus driver is like. So now I get somebody in my practice who's a bus driver. I want to know, my questions would be, well, what do you do? I mean, so the first thing, turns out bus driving is an extremely stressful job. If you're working for, your public transport services, or you're a trucker or whatever, the working hours are ridiculous. It's highly stressful. You're very sedentary. Your only form of nutrition is basically truck stops, which is truck stop food. You're sleeping basically if you're a long distance driver. It's a completely miserable lifestyle. You're separated from your friends and family. You're on your own. I mean, if that doesn't make you have problems with, well, I don't know what would, right? So listening to patients' stories and their perspectives, and then trying to say, okay, well, how does the disease fit in? Is there something in this lifestyle? And now there's lots of diseases that can happen to anybody that have absolutely zero to do with their lifestyle, right? I mean, these are just things that happen to people because, again, that's just biology. You could say this is luck of the draw. I mean, you could have lived as healthy as you possibly could have managed, and you can still end up getting cancer. Why did you get cancer? I don't know. It's in your biology. Maybe cancer runs in your family. Who knows? It's a freak accident. But for many, many people, and many of the problems that we deal with in chronic disease management, some aspect of your life or living conditions or your belief system or your culture plays a role, and even in the interpretation of a disease, right? So one of the things that I learned about trauma, for example, is, and I remember actually one of my psychiatry colleagues telling me this, that it's not the actual trauma that determines the extent of the trauma. And what I mean by that is that you can have two people who had the exact same life experience. So let's take two people who lost a child. It's a catastrophe. It happened to both people. It's the exact same trauma. Both of them lost a child, and both of them might have lost a child due to an accident, whatever it is. Okay. Now, for one person, it's happened. They're sad. They go through their, stages of grief. They'll never fully get over it, but they get on with their lives. For another person, this could completely destroy their life. They would not be able to function as a normal person anymore because of the exact same trauma. So it's not what happened to people that determines the extent of the trauma. It is their personal response to the trauma that actually determines the experience. And once you understand that we don't have to even talk about the trauma. So when I ask people, and this used to be one of my very standard questions, I would say, tell me, what's the worst thing that's ever happened to you? Right? And when people have to start thinking about, well, what is the worst thing that's what it couldn't have been that bad. I mean, if you don't even, for a lot of people, they say, oh yeah, the worst thing that happened to me was when I was a 12-year-old kid, my parents divorced, or whatever the story is. That's okay. We don't have to get into detail around that. But what I now know is that there's something that happened to you in your previous life, which apparently is still affecting you today. And you can see people break down, and so there's this thing about unresolved grief, right? So when you talk to somebody and say, what's the worst thing that ever happened to you? Oh, yeah, well, that's when my father passed. Okay, all right, yeah. And you see they're already getting all teary-eyed, and so I'm very sorry to hear. When did that happen? That happened when I was 14. And here now they're a 65-year-old sitting in front of me, and they're still not over it. And they break down and cry in front of me. So that is unresolved grief. Most people would have, they might have lost their dad when they were 14, but then at some point they get over it, they get on with their lives, and they're still sad, and and you have memories and stuff. But here's somebody who's completely, they haven't gotten over it. They've never had grief counseling. They've never gotten past that stage, and that has affected their whole entire life. Is now around this traumatic event of losing their dad when they were 14, which they've never gotten over, which then affects their entire psyche, and their entire life is affected by that. And if you don't find that out, and if I'm not, as a doctor, I didn't ask the question, and so I don't know this, my approach to that patient would be, and again, this comes back to what we had earlier in the conversation, that very often you need to step back and look at the big picture before you can get into the into the minute details. And you don't have to be a psychologist or a psychoanalyst or a psychiatrist to do these, because a lot of this stuff is common sense. And again, we come back to the other ship, and I said a lot of this stuff is stating the obvious. Once somebody tells that to you, it becomes so obvious, and then suddenly you start seeing it everywhere, and then you kind of almost feel foolish for not having seen it before, because it is so obvious when somebody points you in the direction and just tells you, okay, see, this is what it is. And I would say there's countless instances of those kind of aha moments that I've just had by listening to my patients and by asking questions, very often open-ended questions. Another one of the questions that I very often ask my patients is, because the longer you do medicine, the more you realize also the damaging effect of so-called adverse childhood events. Things that happened to you as a kid that you might have long forgotten, but then that totally affect you for the rest of your life. I mean, they basically determine your entire life course. What happens after that is determined by something that might have happened to you, I don't know, when you were 4 years old, right? So one of the questions that, and then most of my colleagues will say, well, I don't have time to get into that. I don't want to open a can of worms. That's one of the most common things. So one of the skills you have to learn is how do I even ask those questions, and what do I do with the answers? Right. But before I ask the question, I kind of have to know, why am I even asking these questions, right? And this was also something I learned from a professor who told me, he said, you know what, Dr. Sharma, if the answer doesn't matter, don't ask the question. If the answer matters, make sure you get an answer. And those were the two very important pieces of advice in taking a history, right? So I could ask you all kinds of questions, but if I don't know what the answer is, so when I ask you a question, I already kind of say, what are the possible answers that you could give me? It could be a, yes, no. Well, what if you answer this question with a no? What is that going to mean to making the diagnosis, going on with it? Or if you said a yes, where do we go with this? If I don't know what that yes or no is going to mean in terms of actually my next steps, then why am I asking the question?
So here's my question on that. This is fascinating. I've never thought of this before until you brought it up. If trauma is sometimes connected to obesity, or obesity is sometimes indirectly, and jump in and tell me I'm wrong if I'm misinterpreting this, to obesity, then you're coming in as a specialist, as a doctor specializing in obesity. Those issues around trauma seem to be more in the domain of a psychiatrist or a psychologist.
Right.
So how do you bridge the gap between understanding, asking the question, getting an answer, and what do you do with the answer if it is tied toward
all right,
something?
Great question. So and I'm and thank you for asking, because this is exactly the the discussions that I often have with colleagues. Like why do you waste time, or why do you spend time doing this? I say, not because it's going to help me find a solution for this patient, but because the patient might not be seeing that connection. And by asking those questions and getting the patient to think about how that trauma is affecting them today and has led to where they are today, that's where the patient has the aha moment. And they've been blaming themselves all their lives for not being able to, follow the diets and do the stuff that people have been telling them to do. And then every time they try, they fail, and it never works. And now this is, in this context, we talk about internalized weight bias, right? When and that affects your self-esteem and your confidence and your ability to do things, self-efficacy, etc. And you've been blaming yourself all along. Why? Because nobody ever told you that the reason that you have all of these problems and your entire life history from dropping out of high school and everything else that happened after that, and maybe your drug and addiction problem is all connected to this one incident that happened when you were a 4-year-old, where you saw your dad, beat your mom or whatever it was, right? And they don't, and patients haven't made those connections. But coming in as an outsider and then getting that, I said, well, so what did you do? Well, every time this happened, the situation was there in my home. After the incident, my mom would come to me and try to comfort me. And one way of her comforting me she would offer me sweets. Right? And so I learned because of that when there was a traumatic event, when there was tension in the home, or when there was any kind of tension, the response to that would be I would do, what my mother did. She gave me sweets, so I turned to sweets for comfort, and that would make me feel better. It would make me feel loved, and that pattern of using sweets or turning to sweets for comfort when there was stress, when there was something unpleasant going on, when there was something going on that was scaring me, where I didn't know how to respond, well, we would all turn to food. Not at all uncommon, right? So this is a learned behavior. And now this then carries on. So now even into my adult life, I find when I'm having a stressful day, or my boss is yelling at me, or my boss is yelling at my colleague, next thing I find is I'm I'm dipping into my drawer of food, which, by the way, I keep because I know when these incidents happen, that's what's going to, that's what I can turn to. That's going to calm me down. So these patterns all date back to what happened, to the fact that this is what was going on at home. Right now, this is not the reason why we have an obesity epidemic, and this was not the reason why, when you see someone with obesity, oh, well, you must have had a bad childhood. No, because there are lots of people who don't. They have completely different reasons why this might have happened, or why they might have obesity. And that's, again, the importance that when we think about something as complex as obesity, where you have to, but every patient has their own story, and you need to figure out the story. And the main reason for figuring out the story is not because the story is going to give you a lot of hints on treatment, but it helps you explain to the patient why you think, because these patients are looking for answers. They say, I don't know why I do this. Every time I'm upset, I go out and binge eat, and I have no idea why I do this. I know it's not good. I feel bad after doing it. Every time it happens, I say, yes, I need to have more willpower, and I'll make sure it never happens again. And then it happens again, and I never understand why this happens. And then you make the connection to them, and then suddenly, okay, now I understand why I do this. And now that I've understood, I can stop blaming myself for doing this and feeling bad about myself when it's happened. I can now start taking a constructive approach and say, okay, so how do I avoid this how can I prevent this from happening? And that would be the first step in this. So that you're trying to understand that, why did this happen to me, right? And for those patients where this is relevant now, I'm not saying that everybody who has obesity, blames it on their childhood or their upbringing or that there's a trauma story there, because there's lots of different paths. The good news in terms of treatment is that once you've gained weight, and it doesn't matter why or how, everybody's up against the same problem. And that problem is that once you put the weight on, your body is going to do what it can to keep the weight. Bodies defend their body weight. That's just normal biology, right? And your body doesn't, and the centers that regulate your body weight, which are very powerful, by the way, in defending your body weight, that's what they do, and that's what they're good at, and that's what they are very effective at. They don't really care how you put on the weight, right? They don't see the childhood trauma. They just see the weight, and they say, okay, fine. So now you're 200 pounds, okay, and now your body says, well, let's do what we can to keep you at 200 pounds. And that's the biological challenge of weight management. This is why short-term weight management, you can go on any fat diet. Losing weight is very easy. Keeping it off is almost impossible. That's because of the biology. That's your body is going to resist weight loss. And if you force it to lose weight by going on some kind of diet or exercise program, whatever it is, putting in a gastric balloon or whatever your strategy is, your body is going to fight you because it wants the weight back. And that biology is kind of universal. And the solutions from a treatment perspective address that biology. But because that biology is the common denominator of everybody who has obesity, is why the new medications that we now have, which actually address the biology of how the system works, pretty much work for everybody independent of why they gain the weight, which is the amazing stuff, right? Because you've got this, on the one hand, I've just told you that there's a lot of different reasons why people gain weight. On the other hand, we now have medications to which 95% of people who take them it's going to work for them.
On that note, briefly, if you're comfortable about talking about it, if not, we won't go there before we move on, is
sure.
With some of those medications, I assume you're referring to Ozempic? Is that what you're
Well, Ozempic is what people call it, but the molecule is actually semaglutide, and semaglutide is actually it's a slightly modified molecule of a natural hormone that your gut makes every time you have a meal.
What can you briefly just talk a little bit about what Ozempic is for people who don't know? What your thoughts are on it from a doctor's perspective who is an expert in this field?
Sure. So, as I've already mentioned, there's a center in your brain that's responsible for controlling your body weight, and its job is to defend you against weight loss. So when you're trying to lose weight, this center is going to fight you, make sure you don't keep losing weight. And if you do lose weight, it's going to make sure that weight comes back as quickly as possible, right? So that's the so-called homeostatic system. It's like a thermostat in your room, right? If I have a thermostat in my room, it's set on 30 degrees. If I open the windows, temperature comes down. I close the windows, temperature goes back up to 30 degrees, right? So that's really what this, call it the set point or call it the homeostatic system. That's what the system does. Now, there are signals that go into the system from your gut that signal the size and the magnitude of the meal. And what this basically means is every time you have a meal, my gut is going to release a hormone, actually several hormones, that then, tell my brain that I've eaten. And now my brain knows I've eaten, so I get the sense of satiety, which then is the signal to stop eating. And basically what these hormones are, Ozempic and all the other molecules that are out there and that are going to be out there, are basically versions of this hormone that do exactly that. So when you inject these molecules, your brain thinks you've just had a large meal. It's very difficult to overeat when you've just had a large meal. So if you constantly feel like I've just eaten, what does that mean? That means I'm not hungry. And that means when I sit down to eat, just because it's time to eat, I'm not going to have any problem, stopping. It's very easy to control the amount I eat when I'm not hungry versus if I'm starving, which is what happens when I go on a diet, where, the centers are actually telling me, no, what's going on over here? You got to be eating more. But I'm trying to resist that with my executive function, the tricks I can do, and games I can play. But this is very straightforward. So you're basically injecting the same hormone that would normally tell your brain that you've just eaten, as a result of which you're no longer hungry. I mean, think of yourself going to an all-you-can-eat buffet after not having eaten all day, versus going to an all-you-can-eat buffet after you've just had a large meal.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? How much are you going to eat from that buffet?
One shrimp.
Right.
Yeah.
And you would have no problem, saying, well, you know what, that dessert surely looks good, but there's no way I can eat this. I mean, I don't even want to eat it. I'm not even thinking about eating it. Why? Because your brain is now in this state where it thinks you've just had a large meal, which you haven't, because you've just injected that same signal. And that's why these medications work, right? So they basically fool your biology into thinking that you've had a large meal, which you haven't had. So they work. But now, on the downside of that, when I stop the injection, what happens?
Yeah.
It's like your brain breaks up and says, where did all those calories go? And then you get patients very quickly having, then the body does what the body does, and that's try to replace all the weight you've lost. And so, you could say this is a problem with the medications. I would say this is not the problem with the medications only work work when you take them, right? That's the that's the funny thing about medications. And I haven't changed the set point, right? If you were 200 pounds and your brain thinks you need to be 200 pounds, taking these injections does not make your brain decide, okay, now 150 pounds is okay. No, it still wants to be 200 pounds, but it's not worried because it looks like you're having these large meals constantly, which you're not, because you're just injecting the hormone that is making the brain think you've had a large meal, which you haven't had.
And
Right?
you still would have to deal with the story that we spoke about earlier, that we to loop back,
Yeah,
right?
but that becomes a lot more simple. I mean, that
Really?
you have to deal with the story if it's still really affecting you, and very often, once you've recognized the problem, people actually can deal with those problems. They have these aha moments. Okay, oh, so that's what's happening. Now I understand. And once they understand, they can come up even with their own ways of dealing with this problem, right? And then, yeah, of course, the psychologists can help. And and now we have all kinds of apps that will help. And there's, online services and whatnot. There's workbooks you can fill out. You can do all of that. But on the other hand, doing all of that is not going to change your obesity. That's the other part of this, right? So I can do all the psychological counseling I want, and I can stop you from binging. That does not mean you're going to lose weight, because if your body has decided you need to be 200 pounds, you're going to be 200 pounds no matter how much psychological counseling I give you, right? So you have to look at them as related problems, in the sense that the one problem has led to the other,
Okay.
but now they're two different problems.
So would medicines like Ozempic, in a positive sense, almost build a habit? So your body is used to this, and even if you go off it, the body now
No,
expects that, or not?
no, no,
No.
it wouldn't. I mean, all the research we have so far is it wouldn't.
Yeah.
And why would it, right? I mean, it's just, it's making your brain think that you've had a large meal, which you haven't had. Now, if you're not injecting and you're not eating, well, then obviously your brain is, doesn't see the meal. And it does what it does, which is it makes you hungry and makes you want to go out and eat. And then you're going to go out and eat, and you're going to put the weight back on.
Are there any side effects as of now?
Well, there are side effects in the sense that, these are very powerful hormones, right? I mean, these gut hormones, and you're injecting them. And normally these hormones, when they're released in the body, they only last for a few minutes. Now you've actually modified the molecule. So now, instead of lasting a few minutes, it actually lasts for weeks, or several days, which is why you can inject it once a week. So it is, in a sense, non-physiological. I mean, the first thing you need to know, these are hormone treatments, and these are very, very powerful hormones. And because they're so powerful, and because they're not working on the body in the way that they would normally work, there are side effects. Now, interestingly, all of the side effects are explained by what the hormone does. And one of the things you have to do when you start on these medications, you start at a very, very low dose, the lowest dose that your patient can tolerate. And then you work your way up from there. And what we've learned by using these medications is that most patients will actually tolerate effective doses, but it might take you several weeks before you can get to that high dose. And so it's a question of patient management. And there's also differences. Some patients are very sensitive to things like nausea. Some patients may get vomiting, but again, most patients don't. And if you do it properly, if you titrate slowly, if you tell the patient, and then there's certain things you can do, in terms of, behaviors that can lessen the risk of side effects. In very rare cases, there are serious side effects. One of them being pancreatitis, which is basically inflammation of the pancreas. Those are very rare side effects. We don't fully understand why they happen to some people. They happen quite rarely. They're not. It's not going to kill you, and the solution to that is you stop the medication, and then the problem is solved, right? And then you probably don't want to try that medication again. So these are the severe rare side effects. Now, what's also important in the context is that at least when we talk about the so-called GLP-1 molecule, that's not a molecule. I mean, this molecule has been used for treating people with diabetes for the past 15 years. So there's a lot of experience with using these type of medications, not in the context of obesity, but in the context of diabetes. But the biology is the same, and the side effects are the same, and the risks are the same, and the benefits are the same. So we are actually quite comfortable using these medications, and now we actually have data recently published showing that if people who have heart problems because of obesity, use these medications long enough and manage to lose weight, that will actually prevent them from having another heart attack or having another hospitalization or perhaps even death, right? So in terms of long-term safety, I think we are pretty comfortable with these medications. Again, remembering that they are basically this is hormone treatment, right? But we always have to remember these are very powerful medications. If they're not used properly without medical supervision and people are not informed, then you can run into problems, and those problems are generally avoidable if you get proper counseling. I mean, these are not the kind of medications that you can just go into the pharmacy, buy, and try. Most people are going to run into problems if that's what they do.
Yeah, that's a really big picture and detailed explanation from a source that I would fully trust in asking that question to. With all of the different media out there, it's hard to know. So thank you for really clarifying that with such straightforward points, details, and both the positive and the side effect. The last question I have to ask you around leadership before we talk about your music, which is another side of you, and we're still on the Dr. Sharma component of this as one of, if not the leading obesity specialist in the world, is over your career. Could you share with us your leadership philosophy, especially in the context of advancing obesity research and treatment, and how it has evolved over your career?
Well, if you start with the leadership aspect, it's well. First of all, one of the key things is networking, right? Sometimes I remind it's not what you know, it's who you know. I trained at a time there was no internet, there was no Google, there was nothing. If I wanted to look up something, I actually physically have to go into the library, pick the book, and read the book. So very often, and especially this applies to medical practice, but most areas of life is it's who can I ask when I have an issue or when I have a problem. So creating a network of advisors around you and people who are just colleagues, and that requires networking. So that requires the skill of building your own professional network of people that you can turn to for advice, that you can follow, that you can listen to. So that's important, and that's important in leadership for the following reason: that especially as a leader, you might often have to do a lot of things that are expected of you, which you just don't know what the answers are. So the more people you can ask around you for specific questions, the more effective you'll be as a leader. So don't be afraid to ask, but you also have to create the network of people. So I need to know who to ask, and I need to be able to ask them, and I need to have a relationship with those people in the sense that, yeah, they'll give me a straight answer when I need it. And so if you think about who are the people that I could just pick up a phone and call them when I have a quick question, make a list of all those people that you know, and you'll see that for some people it's a very small list, but for me it's a big list, because that's one of the things that I've always nurtured, and again it comes back to the kind of person you are and the personality and how do you build your own professional network. But the who you know aspect, and what's your relationship to the people you know, and how comfortable are you asking for advice. So the most dangerous person is the person who does not know what they don't know and does not ask for advice. See, and I have no problem telling my patient that, okay, that's a great question, or this is a great problem that I don't know, but I know who to ask. And then sometimes I pick up the phone in front of the patient. I have the patient sitting in front of me, and I'll pick up this phone. I'm calling my cardiologist buddy. I say, listen, I've got this patient here. This is what the meds he's on. This is what I'm seeing in his ECG. What do you think this is? And then often they'll answer the question on the phone. And I say, okay, so I just called my buddy cardiology here, and this is what he thinks is the problem. This is what we're going to do. Solves the problem, right? I learn, patient is comfortable, everybody wins. So being able to do that in all kinds of situations. So this is a clinical setting, but if I'm running a research team and I have one of my students come up to me and says, Dr. Sharma, so we have this problem, I've, for the last 3 hours, I've not been able to get this machine to do what it's supposed to do. I say, okay, that's not a problem, because I know this, down the floor, there's this other guy, they have the same machine. There's a tech who's been using the machine for the last 5 years. Why don't we go ask that guy? Or why didn't you go ask that guy and tell him Dr. Sharma sent you? And that solves the problem, right? So a lot of this leadership business has to do with coming up with solutions, but you don't have to have the knowledge. You just need to know how to solve or how to point people in directions that will solve the problem. And then people will come to you for problems. They will say, okay, I don't know how to solve this problem. Well, go ask Dr. Sharma because he'll tell you who to talk to. So Dr. Sharma doesn't have the answer, but he knows the guy who may have the answer. And because Dr. Sharma knows the guy who has the answer, he'll introduce you to the guy who has the answer, and that's going to solve your problem. So now you become this person that everybody looks to, not because you have the answer, but because you kind of find the answer, right? So that I think is an important leadership skill. I think the other leadership skill is listening, right? The less talking you do and the more listening you do, and trying to understand the problem. And again, this comes back to the big picture business. So when people come to you with problems which you are trying to solve, you need to understand what's the root cause of this problem, like what's and once you understand that, then you can come up with solutions, etc. Another very big leadership thing that I learned was that you need to work outcome oriented and not process oriented. One of those pieces of advice I got, I said, hire good people and then get out of their way. Make sure that the people that are working for you understand what the outcome is that you're looking for. Because to promote outcomes, there's a lot of different ways of getting to the outcome. And ultimately, if you can get that outcome, I don't care how you get there. But it's up to you. That's your job, and you might actually have the answers of how to do that. But if I tell you exactly how I think you need to do it to get there, that may not be the best idea. So this whole motto of trusting, make sure that people understand what the goal is or what the expected outcome is, and then kind of leave it to them to try to produce that. Obviously you would help them, you would understand. I can give you my advice, but don't get upset when people don't follow your advice and they find their own way of solving the problem, which is great because they've solved the problem.
So I love that. Networking, it's who you know as well as what you know.
And allowing people to work, to do things, make sure they understand what is expected.
Yes.
But then don't micromanage them in terms of the process.
That reminds me of Stephen Covey. We'll start with the end in mind.
Yeah, always.
And tell people where you want to go. But like you said, don't sit over their shoulder, stand over their shoulder, watching every move. Don't micromanage.
Yeah, because don't do that. And if somebody's not achieving the results or is not getting the outcomes, well, then maybe they don't have the skills to do it, right? And then go find someone else to do it, right? But micromanaging people does not get them to, and this is different. As a professor, you're a teacher, so obviously part of my job is to teach people how to do things. But even in the teaching environment, you still. So I give my students a problem to solve, but then I kind of leave it up to them to come up with the solutions to the problems. And you'll be amazed how people come up with solutions. And they'll come up with solutions you've never thought about, and which I would have never thought of. Oh yeah, that's how you can do this. And they become resourceful, etc. And they do it. And then just accept that different people will have different ways of doing things. And always keep the outcome in mind. So I think that's an important leadership skill. Why do people follow a leader or flock to a leader or follow somebody? It's when they trust you, which is another very, very big part of this, is that people need to have the sense that they can trust you, because that's when they'll follow you. That's when they'll take your advice. And I've always found that the best way of getting people to trust you is not by pretending to know everything, but actually by being very modest about what you know and being very conscious of your limitations and being very honest. And I've always done this to my patients. I've said, you know what, that's a great question. I've never seen this problem before. I have no idea what's going on over here. But you know what, I think I know who we could ask. And that will instantly create a completely different level of trust between, now this patient is going to trust me because I've admitted that I don't have the answer. Versus had I said, oh yeah, I know exactly what's going on, and then I pretend I know the answer and I do something, and then maybe secretly I'll ask my colleague, but then I'll pretend it was my idea. People get a sense of it, that's not real. So the more open and honest you are about things, even about your own thought process and your own uncertainty and the doubts that you might have and the problems that you foresee, but maintaining your positive outlook to say, whatever the problems are, yes, I know this is going to be difficult. I know this is not going to be easy. I know there are going to be problems here. But but then when we encounter those problems, you try to solve them. So it's that kind of relationship, right? It's this. I've never seen leadership as being in command. Right? There's a difference between being in command and being a leader. Leaders are not in command. If you look at some of the most powerful leaders, they're not commanders, right? They are people
Expand
who,
on that. Yeah.
yeah, and you can say, I mean, there are situations where you need camera. If you're thinking about, certain situations in certain environments, you do need to have a very strict hierarchy, and people need to follow orders, and there has to be somebody giving those orders, and they need to be followed. But in most of the environments, especially in a kind of environment in which we work, I mean, I work in internal medicine now. You could say that in a surgical environment, for example, the chief surgeon, like he's like the chief pilot, right? I mean, he's the boss. But I've seen a lot of the chief surgeon, although they actually have the power to tell people what to do. I often find that the most effective ones are the ones who will actually listen to the nurse or the junior guy who can point out something and say, yeah, or ask the question, and are comfortable enough in their position to not feel challenged by junior people challenging them, right? I mean, I want people to ask me critical questions. I want people to challenge me on my ideas. When I think I have the answer and somebody points me and says, no, but Dr. Sharma, that's not true, right? And then they present me something else. Being able to accept, yeah, I was wrong. I didn't know that. Thanks for pointing this out. Now I understand. And when people sort of, even as a leader, see you in those kind of positions, and if you as a person are comfortable and say, well, this is not going to undermine my position, or I'm not egocentric type of person. Yeah, I've got all the answers. I'm the boss. You do what I say, which is the sort of the command version. But let's not make the mistake that at some point you also have to make decisions.
Yeah.
Right. So, but that's a different story. But you make a decision and make it clear why you're making that decision, and also make it clear what that decision is perhaps based on. And most decisions are based on uncertainty, right? Most decisions are judgment calls, right?
Yeah. What I'm hearing you describe is really refreshing, especially from the medical profession, is be a learn-it-all, not a know-it-all. It's favoring the value of humility over certainty. And coming from you, with all you've achieved in your career, I think it hits even, it really is a powerful takeaway, is that you're not afraid to say, I don't know.
Oh,
And
I'll also be the first guy to admit I'm wrong, right? If
yeah,
somebody points me to something that was wrong, I would, I didn't know this, or I was, I thought I knew it, but I didn't. I would have absolutely no problem admitting that. I mean, I'd be the first to admit it, and I would actually thank the person for pointing out that this is something that I was mistaken.
does that come because you're where you are in your field?
No.
Where
I
you,
think I think it's a personality. In some ways, it's a personality thing. I mean, you have to be comfortable enough in your own persona,
yeah,
that you can accept that. And for some people, that's very difficult to accept, and they feel threatened by somebody challenging them on their ideas, and they want, I'm the boss, I'm the guy paying you, and when I say this is how we do it, then this is how we do it. Uh, that's just not my environment. That's not how I work. And there are perhaps instances where that may be the best or most effective way of managing people, but that's not how I do it. And I've never found that necessary to give orders. Right? For me, it's always been a kind of negotiation. I think let's do this, and then again, somebody's got to do it. And then the other part is the taking responsibility for stuff. Right? Like I said, I mean, very often decisions are judgment calls that you make based on incomplete data. This is, to the best of my knowledge and experience, I think this is the path we should go down, and then it may turn out to be the wrong part, but then you also take full responsibility for that, right? And then don't blame it. Yeah, but the reason I did this, and don't make excuses. No, okay, so that was wrong. Yeah, okay, great. So it's a learning experience. It's like that famous story where where the guy gets, who just lost his company $1 million, gets called into the boss's office, and the boss, tirades him and shouts at the guy and gets really upset, and then at the end of the day he says, okay, all right, don't do it again. He said, what do you mean don't do it again? You're not going to fire me? He says, why would I fire you? We just spent $1 million on educating you.
love it. We talked about the Dr. Sharma component life, which is the majority of your adulthood. Now I'd like to shift to another component of your life. And one of the things that I admire about you, since getting to know you a little bit in person and working together, but also following you online, is you are, I would call, a master of reinvention or reimagining yourself in this chapter of your life. So I'm now going to introduce you in a slightly different way. Please welcome Arya M. Sharma, Berlin-based doctor turned indie folk blues musician. Can we talk about what is happening in your life now
Okay.
as you move from one of the world's leading doctors in your field, obesity, to a indie folk rock musician? How did you get started playing the blues?
All right. So, I've always had an interest in music. I've always grown up with music. I've probably been playing the guitar since I was 17, dabbling in it. I've never had formal education. I never had a guitar teacher. I'm totally self-taught, not very well. And I've always had an interest, but I never had the time because, learning an instrument, playing an instrument, I'm not talented in any way or form. I have to make up for that through practice, a lot of practice. And in my job, I never had the time for that, right? If you think every professional musician probably spends 3 to 5 to 6 to 10 hours a day practicing their instrument and their art, well, I don't have that time, right? So I kind of dabbled in this, and then it was probably about 10 years ago now, I would say, just turning 55, when I was starting to think remotely about that there's going to be this time point at which I'm going to retire. It's going to be maybe 10, 15 years from now, but 10 years. That was kind of the number in my head. Longevity kind of runs in my family. My grandfather was 104. My dad's he's in his early 90s, and so I was thinking, okay, if I do retire at 65, 67, and I have another 30 years to go, what do I do with that time? And the obvious answer for me was, well, I could do music. I could finally get around to doing the music that I've always wanted to, but never had the time to. But I wanted to hit the ground running. So one of the first decisions I made, this was a very conscious decision that I made, at around age 55, which is approximately 10 years ago. I turned 65 this year. Was that by the time I retire, I want to be good enough to get on the stage with professional musicians without embarrassing myself or them. That was the goal. And what I realized was, well, then I basically have to start from scratch again. I need to start taking this more seriously. I need to start getting those lessons. I need to start making time and prioritizing this. So one of the first things I did, I signed up for lessons. I went back to the very basics, online lessons. That then muted into taking private online lessons. This was all before COVID. Nobody was doing private online stuff, but I found somebody who was doing this. And I got that, made a huge difference. I would say probably one of the best teachers in the field. Because not every good musician is a good teacher, right? This is like not every good doctor can teach medicine. So there's certain skills. So you got to find the right person. So I was lucky. I found the right person. I started doing this. I started putting a bit of time. I said, okay, I'm going to do a minimum of 2 or 3 hours of practice a day. I'm going to find the time. And on top of that, because of I do a lot of traveling, I bought myself a tiny little travel guitar so that on the times where I'm sitting around in airports, hotel rooms, traveling, I would always have something where I could put in, so I get my I get my practice time. That was the first thing that I started doing. The second one was I said, well, if I want to get on stage with people, then I need to know how to get on stage with people, because up to that point, I was always practicing by myself. This is basically like you're in your garage or you're by yourself in your room and you play, and that's great. But the kind of music I'm interested in is you play with other people. So you need to put yourself out there. And so I mustered all of my courage, and I'd actually put an ad on, I believe it was Facebook at the time, and looking for other musicians that I could play with. And then somebody suggested, yeah, why didn't we have these open stage, open mic jam things going on? Why didn't you just come out there? And so I went out there, didn't know anybody. I didn't even know that the scene existed. And I took my guitar and I went up there. And for the first few times I was standing in the background, I was strumming the few chords I knew. Uh, but I kept working on it. I'm in the background. I was taking my lessons. I was getting better at this. And one of the things I then realized was that when you go to these sessions, these open mic situations where you play with different people every time, you always have to play the song the singer knows how to sing. Because if somebody sings the song, well, then there's somebody, whoever's doing the vocals is the person who calls the song, and then you got to play the song. The problem with that is that when you go to these sessions, every time there's a new singer who wants to do another song, you never get to play the song you want to song. So I said, at some point, if I want to play if I want to work on the song that I want to play, I'm going to have to learn to sing, and I've never sung, right? And my wife still to this day says, well, you shouldn't be singing. So I learned the lyrics of some song, and then I had these 3 songs that I knew the lyrics for, and then I realized that in this kind of music with this kind of setting, the crowd was very forgiving. It was a very enthusiastic crowd, and so I started getting comfortable actually singing the song. So I would go to these jams. I was living in Edmonton, great music scene, which I discovered then, over time, that there was a lot of places you could go to, and I would go to this, and I had 3 songs that I knew how to sing. And those would be the same 3 songs I would be playing every time. And then I learned, now my repertoire, of course, is much bigger. But that's how I started off. And over the time, I mean, I've gotten to the stage now where I'm comfortable getting on stage with professional guys. And I think the professional guys are comfortable playing with me. Right? But I've just had the opportunity to play with really great musicians who've been doing this all their life. And I find that they accept me. I'm very conscious of my limitations. I mean, I'm never going to get anywhere close to where these guys are because they've been doing it for 40 years. And, I just started. I still see myself as a beginner. But I also find that again, you got back to the picture, well, why would I do this? Right? I'm not making this to make a living. I'm doing this because it makes me feel good, and it makes other people feel good, and there's this enjoyment that I get out of doing it, and so I do put in the time, I do the work, and I take it seriously. And now that I've sort of retired or semi-retired, I actually do have the time to do this. And having come back to Berlin, one of my big worries when I retired in Edmonton and moved back to Berlin was, I didn't know, is there even a blues scene in Berlin? Like who I didn't know. So I spent 2 years doing exactly what I've always done: is you go to the places, you show up, you meet people, you network. I get to know people, people get to know you, and then you get comfortable in that situation. And so I've invested that time. It's been 2 years. Then at some point I said, okay, if I really want to do this, I need to get more gigs. Now, in order to have gigs, I need to get people to, if I call a bar, I say, listen, can I play that? They say, well, what kind of music do you send me? Something. I didn't have anything to send anybody. So I said, okay, now I got to make some demo tapes. And then as I started thinking about doing the demo tapes business, and I said, well, then, if I am going to go in a studio, and if I am going to get there with the musicians, and if we are going to spend the money doing the demo tapes, why not do a proper job? And so that's what we did in January. I went to the studio. We spent 4 or 5 days. I got it mixed, it got mastered. I've got 4 songs now, all of them originals. I wrote the music, I wrote the lyrics. And now I'm getting into this whole thing about, okay, so now I've got the music, that's the product. For me personally, it kind of reminds me of when I wrote my first paper, my first scientific paper. It's like, so my dropping my first single is like publishing your first paper, right? So all the work that goes into the paper, now you get the paper, you submit it, gets accepted, and then it appears in press, and now other people read the paper and they say, hey, I read your paper and it's not bad, it's an interesting idea, whatever it is. I'm hoping I get that kind of response with the music. So for me, it's the same thing. So now this is my first single. It goes out. I'm exposing myself, and we'll see what the feedback is. And some people will come back and say, "Oh, that was nice," and some people say, "Well, it's not my thing." But again, I'm very comfortable with that because music is like everything else in life. Doesn't have to be everybody's taste. Sort of when you reflect on all of the things that, all the ups and downs, and so, there's no regrets, right? There's no, there's not this thing, had I done such and such, this or this might have happened. I would say, part of this whole resilience and perseverance business is that you take whatever happens, and make the best out of it. And that's possible. And I think it takes a certain mindset. It takes a certain I don't know. It's a bit of a character trait of, you could say it's a glass half empty, half full kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm more of a glass half full thing, kind of person when I think about stuff. But it's also a game. I mean everything in life ends up being a game. And what you try to do is you try to understand the rules. You try to play by those rules. You may end up, like in any game, bend the rules as much as you can, but stay within the framework of what the game allows you to do, and then just see how far you can get, right? And then and if you keep playing the game, you keep getting better at it, and a lot of that stuff turns out to be very generic skills. So what I'm learning right now is, and realizing is that a lot of the skills that I had that made me successful, as a professor, as a teacher, as a doctor, translate beautifully to, this next stage of my life, which is basically starting from scratch, but in a completely different field. And it turns out that it's not all that different.
The gift of this part of your journey for me, what's so inspiring is part of it is your age. Like you had a full career, and in your 50s, you decided I'm going to try something new, which is not easy to do, is because I've watched your videos, and we're going to provide you the information where you can watch Arya's videos after this and watch where you can get his song on Spotify. You started something new. It's a real skill set that takes people sometimes decades. That didn't deter you. You also,
Oh no.
right? And you did the things that professional musicians, professional speakers, any type of performer needs to do to get themselves out there, to start getting themselves out there. I don't even need you for you to tell me this, because I've already looked. You have over 15,000 followers on your music Facebook.
Yeah, but they're not following me for my music. They're following me for the other thing that I've done. Music has always been a passion, and the other sort of the side thing which I've discovered, I also enjoy making music videos. So filming live performances and trying to capture what's happening on stage, and then now the mobile phones allow you to do this. I very much enjoy that. In fact, paradoxically, I enjoy live concerts more when I'm filming them than when I'm not filming them, because by filming them, I'm paying much more attention, and I'm much more conscious of what is going on stage and what's happening stage, and I'm trying to predict the next move. Okay, so this guy's going to play solo now, and then this guy's going to play solo. So you move the angle of the camera, and so I'm much more immersed. By basically watching the live concert through my cell phone and trying to capture what is going on stage, I kind of become part of the show, at least in my mind. And that's something I enjoy doing. And because I've had the opportunity of going to a lot of concerts, seeing very good professional musicians do this stuff and trying to capture them, I just capture them on my cell phone. There's nothing fancy about it. There's no editing. But people seem to like that. And that's brought me the following. So it's almost like a bait and switch kind of story. So yeah, they follow my page because of these professional stuff. Every now and then I'll sneak in something of myself. It's like on Spotify. So now on Spotify, if you went there, I already have an artist profile, but there's no music there yet. But I do have a playlist that you can already sign up to, and I put it up last week, and there's already about 40 guys have signed up to this playlist.
I did. I was one of them today.
Yeah. All right. So there's 40 guys on this playlist. So now the idea of the playlist is that the minute my music drops, I add it to the playlist. Now I've already got 40 guys who now have my music on their playlist, and so it is kind of a bait of switch kind of. But that's no difference. I mean, we've always been doing this, and in my professional life, there's been other instances where you do one thing to get people's attention, and then once you have their attention, then you kind of switch the angle. And that may upset some people, and I'm always prepared for that. But it's not, if out of the 15,000 guys say, well, now that he's only posting his own music, 14,000 guys decide no longer to follow me. Fine, I still have 1,000 guys who do follow me, and I'm happy with that.
Well, I really enjoy your music. It is indie folk. I saw a video where you played Muddy Waters. That was your first song, right? And
yeah.
Could you have your guitar with you because you're on the road now. You're
Yeah, I always have my guitar when I'm on the road.
Can you play us something possibly from your new song, or just riff and improvise with something for the next 30 seconds so we can hear a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, I have my guitar. It's the acoustic guitar that I'm carrying. Yeah, so the song that yeah, the first song. It's not the first song I wrote, but it's the first song we're going to be dropping. It's called the Middle Seat Blues, and it kind of it's a story of this guy who's trying to check into his flight, and the airline side doesn't work, and he gets to the airport, and he's the last guy in line, and they hand him the last empty seat, and it turns out to be, Zone 5, Seat 30B. And so he ends up in this middle seat, right? And so it's so the refrain, goes, I got a middle seat. Sorry. I got a middle seat. I got a middle seat. Airline makes me pay my dues. I got the middle seat blues. And it's basically the middle seat blues, and that wasn't quite the way it is on the record. I kind of have to go back and think about it, but so the guy gets on the flight, and obviously he's the last guy to board. The luggage bins are all full, so no ways to put his little roller bag. So then the flight attendant says, "Sorry, sir, that bag's got to go underneath your seat." So now this guy's sitting in the middle seat. He's got the bag in front of his feet. His seat won't lean back, and now he's stuck there for the flight. And and then there's a punchline that happens at the end, which I'm not going to disclose. You have to listen to the song to see what actually happens to the poor fellow at the end of the flight. But it's a story, and that's why I call it a folk indie blues, because somebody warned me, if you just say it's blues, then everybody thinks it's a sad song, and then, people don't like sad. Not everybody wants to listen to sad songs, because people's idea of what the blues is very limited. And if you call it indie blues, that adds a little bit to it, and because you're telling a story, then call it folk blues, because that's what folk music is about. Folk music is about telling stories about life. And because of, I've probably flown several million miles in my career. I was very surprised when I got a letter from Lufthansa saying I'm now their Gold Star Alliance lifetime membership.
Okay.
Which is good, which means I don't have to fly them anymore, because now I can collect my points on other airlines.
So this is a song from experience, and I listened to the song. It's got a great self-deprecating sense of humor. It's relatable. It's fun, and it shows.
And there's a dance.
And there's a dance.
There's a dance to this.
Oh, wow.
I played this for a colleague a couple of days ago. I was in Istanbul at a conference, and I played the guy. Somebody said, "Yeah, you need a dance for this. You want to put it on TikTok, you need a dance." And I was thinking, how would you do a dance for this? And then he kind of showed me a couple of moves, where you're sitting in this thing. So I'm still working on the choreography, but there's going to be a couple of dance moves that come with the song.
And where can we find more about this song and about you when this song drops?
Well, it's going to drop on Spotify and Amazon and Apple. I mean, all of the usual services. But if you look for it, you're going to have to look for Arya M. Sharma, which is easy to remember now because it's the Arya. Well, if you just look for Arya Sharma, there's at least 20 or 30 of them over there, and you won't find me. But if you look for Arya M. Sharma, that's just me. So you don't forget the M. It stands for middle seat. So it's Arya Middle Seat Sharma. That's not what it actually stands for. My middle name is Mitra, but just so you find me. And then on social media, usually what people do is when they search me, then they find all this medical stuff, and then they kind of often say, this can't be the same guy. But eventually they find me. So, and I'm hoping that more people are going to start looking for me for my music than for, what I've done in the past in medicine, because, I'm at this conference here in Banff where this organization, Obesity Canada, which I started, and I think one of the most rewarding feelings of being at this conference is that there's a lot of young people entering the field who are doing extremely good work, and this field is really progressing. And it's almost like they don't need me anymore. I mean, these guys are now doing the kind of stuff that should be happening here, and that's great to see, right? So I don't have any FOMO, fear of missing out, because I'm not doing it anymore. Actually, I take a lot of pride in the work that some of my students who have now grown up, they have faculty positions, they are training people, and you can kind of see that they're now implementing things that I know I taught them, but I taught them stuff that I learned. So, there's a whole history of passing down knowledge and passing down And often it's not the knowledge that you pass down; it's the attitude that you pass down, and as the problem solving skills, and a lot of the things that we've talked about, right? And I hope that I've been able to instill that in a lot of my students, and now I can see them implementing that. It's very similar to watching your own kids become parents. The most rewarding thing about becoming a grandpa for me was to suddenly see my daughters become mothers. And then you watch them parenting, and then you say, well, they're repeating. And they're great mothers, but that's because my wife was a great mother, because apparently she did things right. And in fact, sometimes for my daughters, they catch themselves using the same phrases, the same words. Well, now I'm like my mom, which nobody wants to be, but that's what you say. And it's the same kind of situation. So as you watch your kids become good parents, you must have done something right, because they're kind of modeling you. In my professional career is very much the same. So the students, the trainees, the people that I've mentored over the years, I see them doing things that I suspect they might have learned either because I told them or they watched me do things, and are having success. And a lot of these people are very, very successful. So it's almost like, I've done what I've had to do there. Now you're on your own. Keep going, because I got other shit to do.
And on that note, I want to thank you, Dr. Arya Sharma, Dr. Arya M. Sharma. You're looking him up on Spotify when this podcast will launch around the time of that single. So I encourage you to go out, download that single, and let Arya know what you think.
The one thing I learned is you have to listen to at least 30 seconds for it to count.
Okay. So 31 seconds plus.
31 seconds plus. Once you hit 31 seconds, you can skip it, and I make 0.4 cents on every play. So
perfect. So this is Signature Leadership. This is an extraordinary conversation, and I would ask Arya if you could take us out, just playing something on the guitar as we wrap up the show.
Well, one of my
and if you haven't already, keep going.
Well, the guitar's out of tune. That's how an out of tune guitar sounds played by someone who's an amateur.
Thank you. Amazing.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Great talking to you.
Great talking to you too.